when the easygoing guy stands up to the female narcissist. My name is Jared Mello, the wizard of radical self-respect and the shepherd of black sheep. Today, I want to share a story from Stephen King's book, The Stand, and it perfectly illustrates a narcissistic mother, the easygoing father who is also an enabler, and then a scapegoat daughter. There was also a golden child son who passed away in a car accident, and that is something that definitely happens with a narcissistic parent. In death, if they weren't already, they become the perfect golden child, the angel that can do no wrong. But in the story here, the narcissistic mother, she is very image-oriented and she is extremely critical, and she is image-oriented in the fact that she takes care of things much better than people. And she cares about how they look, and she cares about how other people will think about the family, and she cares about putting on dinner shows and inviting people over to the house and putting on a good show. And there's some stories in the book about how she cares much more about keeping things clean than she does about her own daughter's health. But in the story here, the daughter, who is named Franny, she gets pregnant at 21 years old at college. And she first tells the enabler father / easygoing father about it because they have an alliance. They're the people that they're both on the same team because the narcissistic mother belittles and criticizes them both. And the easygoing guy made a choice in the book, and this is something that's really interesting to me. He said I had to either choose surrender or divorce, and he chose surrender. And normally that is not something that I would encourage doing, but it's an interesting case study on what happens when you stick it out even though you know it's not going to be pretty. And when you hear the rest of the story here, I'll let you make up your own minds if you think he did the right thing or not. But what happens is she tells the father she's pregnant. He is not thrilled about it, but he ultimately still loves her and is like, okay, don't tell your mother about it right away. And you see how this is how that dynamic goes. When there's a narcissistic mother, you have to really tiptoe around her and her big emotions. And the father and the daughter here, they both know that. But a couple days later, the daughter tells the mother that she's pregnant. And she loses it. And she's like, what is everyone else going to think? We did such a good job raising you. We tried to do everything right by you. And then she starts to cry, worries about what other people would think, and calls her a bad girl, etc. And then the mother says to her, you've got another thing coming if you think you're going to stay here with us. He goes, you're an ungrateful little bitch, is what she calls her daughter. And she's like, where are you going to stay? And the daughter is like, well, I don't really plan on staying here, but what business of it is yours where I stay if this is how you're going to treat me? And then the mother slaps her in the face hard because the narcissistic mother, she's basically not upset that her daughter is pregnant, more so than what other people are going to think about her daughter being pregnant, because she cares much more about the image of that than she does the issues that her daughter might be going through because she's pregnant. And the daughter doesn't want to get an abortion. She actually wants to keep the child. It doesn't mean she's going to marry the guy, but she wants to keep the child. And it just turns into a big fiasco. And then at this part in the book, the easygoing father, he says in the background, oh, I know about this because the narcissistic mother says, your father and I are going to be heartbroken. Because she doesn't know, the father already knows. And then you hear the father in the background say, actually, I'm not heartbroken. We're going to be grandparents. And the narcissistic mother is freaking out. And she wants the father to not be a part of this conversation at all because she wants to lay into the daughter. And for the first time, the easygoing father stands up to the narcissistic mother. And she loses it. She's screaming at him, telling him that he's out of control and ridiculous. You need to get out of this room so us girls, she says, can thrash this out. And then she's being hysterical and calls him a bastard. And then the easygoing father slaps her. And the narcissistic mother is shocked, and she falls down. And the easygoing father then says to her, you had that coming for the last 10 years. And it's my own fault too, he says, because I let you be the way that you are. But the narcissistic mother was calling the daughter selfish for getting pregnant and saying, you're such a bad girl, you're such a bad girl. And the easygoing father says to her, no, Carla, that's the narcissistic mother's name, you are the one being selfish. You're the one who was not getting over our son's death and caring much more about the image and what other people would think. And he said, I should have put my foot down 10 years ago, but I didn't, and that's my own fault. And then the narcissistic mother goes into some more hysterics and runs upstairs. And then that leaves the daughter and the easygoing father there. They're consoling one another. But it's a very interesting dynamic because it rings true to me. And what would you say about this situation where the narcissistic mother slaps really hard her daughter for getting pregnant and for saying, what business of it is of yours where I stay? She slaps her. Then the easygoing father, who is also the enabler, comes in and slaps the narcissistic mother. And I think it's pretty interesting to find out what people would think about that story. And I often wonder sometimes, if a narcissistic woman is being that way, I wonder how many times there's a guy that does something like that, and then he's the one arrested for domestic violence. I'm not saying that's what it is every time, but I bet you there's a percentage of times where that is what can happen, where the guy gets pushed to his breaking point, and then he does that. And I'm not saying it's right. This is just the story that's in the book. But what would you think about that dynamic? And this is a situation where easygoing guys get caught up in this situation all the time, where they're also enabling by proxy enabling because their very presence and not standing up to the narcissistic woman, that allows the mistreatment to continue. And the guy finally realizes his error when he sees that his wife slaps their daughter in the face when she's 21. So he's like, you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm going to stand up to her. But what do you think about this here? Like, do you think the guy should have left 10 years ago instead of surrendering and divorce? Yeah, that's a fair thing to say. But it also helped the daughter that the guy stood like he was there, so that she still had him there. And that is the one thing I hear sometimes from the easygoing guys out there, that they don't want to abandon their kids to the narcissistic woman, which is understandable, and there's certainly pros and cons to that, because on one hand, if you are going to allow yourself to get mistreated by the narcissistic woman, that's pretty much what you're communicating to your children. This is how parents interact. This is what's acceptable. And that's not necessarily a good message. But on the other side, you're there for support. And you're there for your daughter to come to you when the narcissistic mother is really being out of control. Because for the very most part, fathers are not going to get full custody, especially of a daughter when they're so young like that. So it's not as cut and dry as I would sometimes make it out to be, especially when there's kids involved. If there's no kids, I would just tell somebody to leave. No, you leave and you go no contact. And I could see why someone would do least amount of contact necessary if they have kids. But it got me thinking about it, and I said, well, maybe sometimes there is an argument to stick it out, although I wouldn't always recommend it. But it's a very interesting story, and I think even though the word narcissist wasn't used at all in the story, it is exactly what I was thinking of, because image-oriented, caring about what other people thought, caring much more about how things look than your own daughter's feelings and your own husband's feelings, worshiping the dead son, treating him as if he's the perfect angel now that he's gone, but meanwhile neglecting the rest of the people in the family. And the father also said to the mother, you know what, our daughter can stay here if she wants. And if she wants her daughter to get christened, we're going to allow that too. And if you're going to give her a baby shower, we're going to take care of her. So he stands up to her and is assertive now, and he's telling her how it is. No, you are not going to run the show here anymore. This is how it's going to be. We're going to be grandparents, and we're going to support our daughter. And to me, it's like a great thing to see in the book where he's like, you know what, thank goodness that guy stood up for himself. He's standing up for his daughter. He's standing up for him. And it's a beautiful thing to read, especially when you're me And I hear this kind of dynamic in coaching sessions all the time. And a lot of times it's a woman telling me about a guy who is like that with his mother. But I've also heard this dynamic as well, where the guy is more of an easygoing guy who is also an enabler, unfortunately a doormat often too, and the woman is just running the show and taking advantage of him. So it was a very interesting part of the story to read there, and this is before the big death. There's a big illness that runs through the book there, and that's what the book is about. But I encourage you to read this book out there if you're in this dynamic, and I think it would be very interesting for you to come away with your own thoughts and opinions about it, because it kind of shows the pros and cons of sticking it out, where normally we would always say just leave, but it's sometimes not always that black and white. But it's that dynamic. The dynamic was the guy just knew his place, or so he thought, and he would let the narcissistic woman get her way. And finally, he had enough. When he saw that she was getting violent with their daughter, he finally put his foot down and stood up to her, and the woman doesn't like it. Now, I don't know what happens because I stopped after this point, but I'll come back and maybe update you at another point on how the story ends there. But I bet you there's a lot of people who could relate to that dynamic. If you liked this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel. I talk a lot about narcissism, dating, and I do interviews with people as well. And comment below if you can relate to this situation. Were you the child in a situation like this where there was an easygoing / enabler father and a narcissistic mother? Or were you the easygoing guy who was sometimes a doormat in the situation? We would love to hear from you. And remember to like the video if you liked it, and to share this video with others that you think might benefit. So with that, thank you very much for watching.